Good morning. My name is Dennis Joseph. I said it so many times I don't think I can forget it. And welcome all of you to this press briefing. It's nothing new. You've been doing this for a while. And every time we try to tell you what is happening and what is to come or what we hope will happen, because it's so important that you support us and you know what is happening so that you can continue to support us. Today the emphasis is on education. Indeed, we have some very important people here who are in education. We have the Permanent Secretary in Education, Chandler Hyacinth. We also have Helena Fontaine, the Chief Education Officer, and Jeffrey Blaise, Assistant Chief Education Officer. We're joined by the different radio stations in Dominica, DBS Radio, of course, and Kyrie FM, and we welcome Vibes Radio now back on the air to this broadcast. I can't take too much of your time because I know you're very busy trying to rebuild Dominica, just as I am. So without too much ado, let me introduce to the microphone the Permanent Secretary in Education, Chandler Hyacinth.
Chandler Hyacinth, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Education. Good morning to all, and in particular, good morning to our listening public. The Ministry of Education, we want to record our deepest sympathies to persons who have suffered loss during the hurricane storm. Maria, in particular, we have had a few deaths from students, among our students. So we want to extend our deepest sympathies to the families of those students who have passed on. In terms of, I will go right along to deal with our education matters. This morning, our reports will come from not only myself, but also from the Chief Education Officer and from the Assistant Chief Education Officer. In terms of education, significant damage was suffered by all our schools, infrastructure across the island. Consequently, the impact of this disaster to the education system is vast. The Ministry of Education anticipates the reopening of schools in the quickest possible time. However, there are certain challenges that would require our immediate attentions. Our main emphasis is to open schools in phases based on the degree and extent of the damage. But there are a number of issues that we have to look at before we can make as we do the assessments and before we can make full announcements. So, for example, we are looking at the road safety in situation. We are looking at the challenge of availability of transportation. We are mindful of the sanitary conditions and health conditions at some of our schools, especially as it relates to the access to running water and the plumbing issues. But we know that in circumstances as this, it's good to begin to engage our students, and we are hoping that we can do so as quickly as possible. As we begin to engage our students, we recognize the psychosocial support that we have to give them, and we are preparing for that. We also know critically that our students are to prepare for CSEC exams, and priority will be given to our secondary schools and our students preparing for CSEC and CCSLC exams. All our third formers are to be writing the CCSLC exams in June, and our CSEC exams starts in May. At this time, we are expected to be doing registration of students. So emphasis will be placed on having the students at school so that we can start the process of registration, and we can start an intense process of preparation for exams and preparation for the SBAs. We want to appeal to students too, as you're at home, you should, since you have your materials, you should not be idle. You should be beginning to prepare for your SBAs, work on your SBAs, prepare to organize your material that you need for examinations. Some of you students out there who have access to the internet, you can get your CSEC curriculums, download those and use them as a guide to prepare yourselves for exams. We have already announced a timeline that we are looking at to resume schools, and as I said, the opening of schools will be based on a phased approach. We have categorized the damage among our schools into 3 categories. Those with very little damage that we can open schools immediately. Those with some minor damage, and then we have those with major damage. And major damage for us includes the entire complete roof has been removed or collapsed ceilings, damage to windows, damage to doors, damage to materials like textbooks and so on, and damage to furniture. In addition to our schools, the Ministry of Education is also responsible for the library services. And we also have significant damage too in the library. Our public library is completely collapsed. Presently, we are trying to save what we can save. We are able to save some of our Dominica collection there. But a lot of the other materials, we cannot save them because they are all wet and destroyed. Whatever we can save, we are trying to place at the documentation center. We also know too that the documentation center suffered significant damage due to flooding. So these are other areas that we have to look at. Our libraries in Portsmouth, some of the roof is uncovered. We have some damage at Grand Bay and some damage at Marigot too as well. Some of our schools we have categorized as having minor damage. Those are ones where we have broken windows, smashed doors. At this time we are doing assessment on these, and once we have the expenses together, we are trying to see if we can do a rapid intervention so that these schools can be open. But the schools where we can facilitate instruction, we have some 16 water is not available. We are still doing assessments. We are still looking at furniture. We want to ensure that the schools have sufficient furniture, and we know that in some of our schools furniture was destroyed. And as we look at those challenges and we assess the situation, we will reopen school on a phased basis, based on school by school basis. From time to time, the Ministry of Education will share the briefing with you, the public, so that you can be advised of the situation and how we expect you, the public, to assist us and to work with us. I now hand over to Dr. Blaise, who will give you further details on the situation in our schools.
Thank you, PS. Good morning, everybody. And as PS did earlier on, PS Hyacinth, permit me to reiterate our deepest sympathies with the families of the students who passed during the passage of Hurricane Maria, as well as some of our parents of students and other members of the community. We express our deepest sympathies to the families and of the loved ones who may have suffered. I will just look at some of the imperatives which will be faced with when we do open our schools. The very first one is, as PS mentioned, the sanitary situation. We will ensure that all our schools have running water via either tanks or the regular supply of water from our school. In addition to that, we'll also be supplying potable drinking water to our students when we do engage them. so we will not envisage any significant issues thereon. We expect our teachers and our principals to report to post as of tomorrow. We want them to engage the community in doing the cleaning up in the classrooms and doing the assessment of the resource needs with reference to material resources, text and otherwise. We are currently in the process of sourcing text material for our students when they do return. So I want to reiterate that we expect our principals and our teachers to report to post tomorrow. It will also give us an indication of the availability of our teachers to ensure that we continue facilitating the process of engagement of students. We also want to have a meeting with all our principals on Wednesday this week. That is the, out of dates, is the 12th? The 11th, Wednesday this week anyway, at 9 o'clock at the Newtown Primary School. Again, this goes out to all our principals. We will be having a meeting on Wednesday. Primary and secondary, that is, all our principals, a meeting on Wednesday at the Newtown Primary School. And Wednesday is the 11th of October. I will again reiterate that all our is the 10th? Wednesday is the 10th of October. Is it? Or is 11th? It's 11th at 10 o'clock. I'll reiterate again, tomorrow we expect our teachers and principals, primary and secondary, to report to post. Therein they will give us an assessment of the resource needs of our schools. They will assist, engage the community in cleaning up activities, and that is particularly relevant for the schools with very, very insignificant damage, the schools that were not significantly affected. But we expect all teachers and principals to report because we want to get an assessment of our staffing needs at our schools. So please register at your schools tomorrow. I will reiterate again that on Wednesday, 11th, we'll have a meeting with all our principals, primary and secondary, from 10 o'clock at the Newtown Primary School. We envisage that we will have regular hours for our schools from 9 to 1 p.m. when we do resume, and that will go for both primary and secondary schools. The reason being the transportation challenges that we have and congestion, so we really would want to start at least in the interim an hour later to facilitate movement of students to the schools. So we will be going, and teachers as well, so we'll be going from 9 to 1 o'clock at those schools. As Pierre said earlier on, and the secondary schools will be facilitating mainly the grade Form 4 and 5 students. In some cases we'll be also having the Form 3. In some of the secondary schools that were not significantly affected, we have the space availability for our students, so we will be going from Form 3 to Form 5. Again, principals will be informed on Wednesday of those schools. And then for the secondary schools with somewhat more damage, we will look at from Form 4 to Form 5. Again, we'll inform principals of those schools affected. For the primary schools, we'll go from grade 2 to grade 6 initially. And PS mentioned the schools that we'll start off with in the first phase of our intervention. We will be starting with grade 2 to grade 6 because we recognize that the infants will have some challenges traversing to get to school. We also anticipate that our students will report in casual wear. We're looking at jeans if possible and t-shirts. We recognize the challenge with the uniforms, so we will facilitate our students with reporting in casual wear. PS mentioned the psychosocial intervention, and Chief will speak a lot about students have been affected in one way or another, and safe to say, and they're well equipped. They are schools in themselves because they will have the furniture and the adequate resources to house students comfortably. We'll be pitching those tents at the communities where there is space. So that is one of our options for the schools in the second category, those with more extensive damage. And I will assure the public that those schools will be opened as quickly as possible after the first set of schools. So we will be using the tent. In some cases, we'll also be doing merger of schools where there is no space for the tent to pitch a tent in a community. We will be merging schools and having them work simultaneously. We have done that in the past, so the Ministry of Education is quite versed in doing that sort of work. One of the opportunities that we have established over the last several years is the transportation system for our students, because we have routinely been transporting our students by and large to schools. So we will do an assessment of our buses, both the private buses that we have contracted and our public buses, the government buses. We are in the process of doing an assessment to ensure that those will be ready when we start. Safe to say that for the first 16 schools, many of them are nested within the communities, so we may not have the issue of the transportation as much because they are the primary schools within the communities, so they are within walking distance in many instances. So we will not have that significant challenge in terms of transportation. I really want to commend our principals and teachers within the communities who have been doing, and our education officials who have in the past weeks been doing significant work in the communities in terms of sharing of relief supplies, in terms of assessing the schools, in terms of relaying information to the Ministry of Education. We recognize that it takes a significant amount of effort and initiative to do just that, to engage oneself in a productive capacity. We need to continue as a nation engaging ourselves productively because we have a significant task ahead of us. It is not daunting. We can get there, but it will take collective effort, as the Honorable Prime Minister has indicated several times, that everybody has to chip in. The Ministry of Education really wants to recognize the efforts of the principals and teachers in that regard. And we want to assure you that we will work earnestly to ensure that our students are safe primarily. That is our major focus. They are safe. They're in as welcoming as possible an environment that they'll be comfortable and continue with their learning with minimal interruptions. We really want to ensure the public that we will do our best to ensure that students are back at school as quickly as possible, but we want the community to support us in that regard, in chipping in to assist in terms of the clearing in of our schools and ensuring parents as much as possible to give students drinking water, although we'll be supplying, but we'll relieve some of the burden on us supplying if you can give them drinking water to get to school when they do get to school, and support the Ministry of Education as best you can. Thank you, and may God bless you. May God bless the Commonwealth of Dominica.
Thank you very much, Assistant Chief Education Officer Jeffrey Blaise. Let me welcome the representatives of UNICEF who've joined us. Thank you so much for coming. And I understand that you'll be involved in trying to get the education of our people moving again. It's just my way of saying it. And as Mr. Blaise spoke about the collective plan and so on, it is collective pain. That pain is not only ours. In Dominica, it is shared by so many people who may at this time be listening to us overseas. And we must always remember that when we speak, we also must speak to them as well. They help, they send in relief supplies, they do all they can to make us feel more comfortable. It's a long struggle, and anybody who thinks it's not is naive. Devastation such as this cannot be repaired like a light bulb switch. It takes time. It takes the pain to do it. I'm so pleased that those in education are the heroes of the moment, pushing forward to get our kids, our students, right back into the schools. This briefing is not new, I mentioned earlier, because they've had DOMLEC, the security people, the distribution people, the health, utilities and communications people, the road clearing people. They're all heroes. Those out there on those heavy equipment, trucks and I'm not sure of how they call it, but caterpillars and bulldozers and so on, clearing the roads right now. They are the heroes of the moment. The police, we have them here. They too are heroes of the moment. It's not easy to deal with such a devastation. It's not easy where you deal with people, everybody wanting at the same time, wanting to get to Roseau now, like I wanted to get to Roseau No, when I was on the road 2 hours ago. But then, that is what we have to face. The Prime Minister will be leaving today for Washington to hold high-level talks with the World Bank and the United States, USAID, in connection with this disaster. Funds are necessary. We can't do it by speech making. We've got to get the money. That's what he'll be doing today. And just to remind you, there was an emergency parliament called on Saturday that extended the state of emergency to the 31st of December. And there is this, which many people don't think they have to follow, but you have to. That is the curfew. It is now from 6 to 6, dusk to dawn, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And I'd like people to follow that because it's so necessary for us to be able to rebuild. It is so necessary that people are off the streets so that the people who have to do the work can do it uninterrupted. And I do hope that we will all play our part, like all of us must do now, if Dominica is to move forward at the pace we want it to. We can, of course, play around and we'll still be here talking the same language. You'll still be asking me to come here to assist in the coordination of the press briefing, and I'll say no, we didn't do enough. I'll say no. So let's move forward now. Finally, I think it has to be finally, we call on the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Chief Education Officer. We had the Permanent Secretary here already, that is Chandler Hyacinth. Now we have Melina Fountain, the Chief Education Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. I want to start by also extending my condolences to the families of those who have lost, especially to the families of the children that we have lost. In times of disaster, it is very, very important that we get back to normalcy as soon as possible. And therefore, as you heard this morning from our Permanent Secretary and the Assistant Chief Education Officer, the Ministry of Education is working very hard to get as many schools as possible to open within the quickest possible time. I'm going to just share with you, because you heard a lot, as I said, from my Permanent Secretary and Assistant Chief Education Officer. So what I would like to share with you, two things. One, to do with tips for parents as your children are out of school at this point in time, and also what the Ministry of Education is going to do about psychosocial recovery. For the parents, there are three things that I really want you to know. Four things. One, know where your children are at all times. It is very, very important, especially those of you who are in the shelters. Please avoid any action that will create a problem for you later on that may lead to any form of child abuse. So we are asking you, very, very importantly, to know where your children are at all times and ensure that they have some level of supervision. We also want you to find some time for your children to do some schoolwork. We know that books are damaged, gone wet, materials are also gone, but you can get them to talk about their experiences in the form of stories. That way they are expressing themselves as well as using language, and at the same time experiencing some psychosocial support, which they will need to help them get over the trauma that they have experienced during Hurricane Maria. So please get them to tell stories. If you do not have any books for them to do some schoolwork, go back to the old-time ways of doing things, and again have them supervised at all times. And the last one I'll give you at this time is that as school reopens, do not allow time to be wasted. The school day will be shorter to begin with, and therefore you will need to help them at home as much as possible. In your neighborhood or within the shelters, you can form study groups with the older students helping the younger ones as they continue. And when we do get back to normalcy, then you can see how things can be changed. But right now, as Mr. Joseph said, it is helping each other, yes, to get back to some form of normalcy, and so that we don't lose out too much when things get back to normal. So finally, in terms of the tip, and this is the most important one, know where your children are at all times and ensure that they are supervised so that nothing bad happens to them, because we know at times like these all kinds of strange things can happen. In terms of psychosocial recovery, the Ministry of Education is arranging for our staff to be debriefed, because we know that a lot of our staff, those who are working within the Ministry of Education, our teachers, they lost a lot. They lost their homes. They went through a very traumatic time. And if we want them to work with our children, then we also need to provide them with some support. So we are putting the mechanisms in place to ensure that they get the support starting this week. We are also working with UNICEF to provide psychosocial support to our children. And so this week, with UNICEF support, we will be doing some training for our teachers, so that as we open schools on a phased basis, our teachers will be providing psychosocial support at the beginning of school for our students. So we are making sure that teachers and students are taken care of. And all of that will be happening between this week and next week. I want to thank these organizations, UNICEF particularly, and we also had Child Fund here last week, seeing how they can assist in providing us with the support that you are. I know UNICEF will be providing us with some tents and kits, school in a box kits, because a lot of our schools are uncovered and all the materials are swimming in water and everything like that. So they will be providing us with school in a box that will be for 40 students to one teacher, kits for the early childhood section, and also recreational kits. So we want to thank them for that, and also for the support with the Return to Happiness psychosocial recovery. CIDIMA, I know, is helping us with school assessments, and UN architects, also those from France. So we also want to thank them for their services, and all those who are assisting us. I guess at a later date we'll have the full list and be able to thank them. So I just want to now reiterate some things that were said before, and mention to our staff, and I hope they are listening. Those that we can get to, we'll get to, but those who are not accessible at this time, I hope you can get the message. There will be a general staff meeting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the Newtown Primary School. So we expect to see as many of you as possible. And once again, all teachers are expected to report to their schools tomorrow morning, and from then on every day, and help with the cleanup and the reporting and the assessments, because principals are expected to come in with a written report of an assessment of their schools, and our principals to come to the Newtown Primary School at 10 a.m. on Wednesday for, again, a debriefing and a meeting on the way forward. I think that's about it. We have said a lot this morning, and I just wish, all Dominicans that we really this time put our heads together and see how we can quickly get Dominica back to Dominica, and even being a better Dominican. Dominica, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Melina Fontaine, Chief Education Officer. Now it's your time, questions, and anybody wants to know anything more or less for that matter, please, now is the time. Anybody? You heard a lot about the education, the program that is being put together to get our children, our students, back in school, back learning again. And I think the program that you heard is in fact very, very well thought out. That's my own assessment. If you think differently, then ask the question. If not, well, your silence means that you have consented to what is going to happen. I also want to say, Miss Melina Fountain, that you're a good motivator. You got me moving. I want to be a teacher. But let us all put our heads together now and move Dominica forward. We can't go back. Maria did her best to put us back. Now the challenge is, how are we going to deal with it? It's part of us, and it is an experience. I always quote, and I'll just say this as an aside so that we don't go home just feeling all we heard was a set of speeches. In the Bible, there's a story of Joseph, my favorite story, who was sold into slavery by his brothers. In years past, he became next to Pharaoh, next to the king. And his brothers came back because there was a famine around and they needed food, and Egypt had all the food, so they came to Egypt to get the food. And they met Joseph. And eventually, after they recognized him, they started begging, oh, we did wrong, we did something that we all regret, and we would like to do all sorts of things to make up. And Joseph said this: you meant it for my evil, but God meant it for my good. Maria brought us the evil. Now let us find the good within ourselves. Thank you very much.